Camilla lost it all in the blink of an eye. In just one afternoon, King Charles III and Prince William ordered the removal of the royal jewelry Camilla had spent decades earning. But this wasn't just about jewels. Hidden beneath the surface were two sealed royal journals, locked away until 2122. What could be inside those pages that made someone act so quickly? And did Charles deliberately keep the full truth buried? Join us as we find out why King Charles and William blocked Camilla from the royal jewels, what she thought she had already won. Camilla Parker Bowles walked into Windsor Guildhall in April 2005, already aware of how limited her position was, and the years that followed were defined by her decision to build from that starting point and not fall apart doing it. The Church of England had refused to conduct the ceremony. There was no cathedral, public procession, or national celebration of any kind attached to the day. The venue sent a clear message that the monarchy was not asking the country to celebrate the marriage, and Camilla accepted the terms without complaint. She began the slow, unspectacular work of earning a place inside an institution that had not yet made up its mind about her. What followed was 17 years of careful, largely thankless public conduct. She attended every required engagement without incident, traveled on official overseas tours, and stood beside Charles at state banquets and national ceremonies while the British press watched closely for the one mistake they could use. She wore the appropriate clothes, said the appropriate things, and gave the tabloids almost nothing to work with. They kept writing what they always wrote, but they could not manufacture an error she had not actually made, and over time, the pressure gradually eased. The first real sign that her standing was shifting came in February 2022. Queen Elizabeth released a statement on her accession day marking 70 years on the throne, and one line in it stopped the country cold. The Queen expressed her sincere wish that Camilla would be recognized as Queen Consort when Charles took the throne, not Princess Consort, the reduced compromise title discussed for years as the safer option, but Queen Consort. The full position, the full symbolic weight of the crown beside the king, was stated publicly by the one person whose word on the matter was final. 7 months after that statement, Queen Elizabeth died at Balmoral Castle on September 8, 2022. In the hours that followed, with no ceremony and no public announcement, Camilla became Queen Consort the moment Charles was declared king. The law required nothing else. The country was in mourning, the cameras were fixed on the coffin, and her position had already changed permanently before the funeral was over. 14 months later, Camilla stood at Westminster Abbey and was crowned. She wore the Cartier diamond palm leaf brooch on her coat, commissioned by the Queen Mother in 1938, worn regularly by Queen Elizabeth after her mother died in 2002, and pinned to Camilla's coat in front of every camera present. She was no longer on the outside looking in. The institution had placed her inside it, publicly and deliberately, at the most watched event the monarchy had staged in decades. Her access to the royal collection expanded in careful stages after that. The Greville tiara appeared on loan for significant occasions. Brooches from the Queen Mother's historic personal collection showed up at her official engagements. None of these pieces was hers by legal ownership. They were loans that came directly from the Crown's trust in her, and that trust had taken 2 decades to build. By early 2025, Camilla held something she had never been formally promised: meaningful access to some of the most historically significant jewelry in the world, and a genuine standing inside the royal inner circle that most observers had never expected her to reach. She had built it carefully across 20 years without stumbling once, and all of it depended on the continued confidence of the Crown. Then, on a Tuesday morning in May 2025, a royal treasurer arrived at Buckingham Palace for a routine audit and opened a secured vault that someone had already visited without authorization. What had been taken from that vault? And why would someone target those specific 3 items above everything else stored inside it? The audit that blew the whole thing open. Donald Walton had carried out quarterly audits of the royal collection for years without a single irregularity. When he arrived at Buckingham Palace on the morning of May 6, 2025, nothing about the appointment suggested this one would be different. His job was the same as always, to confirm that every item in the secured vault was exactly where the records said it should be. He opened the vault, and within minutes the audit had become something else entirely. 3 items belonging to the late Queen Elizabeth II were gone from a secured space that required high-level clearance to enter. With no authorization record, no checkout log, and no official explanation of any kind, the absence of paperwork made the situation clear immediately. This had not happened through any official channel. The first missing item was the sapphire Jubilee brooch, worn by Queen Elizabeth during her 65th Jubilee celebration, and photographed at one of the most documented milestones of her later reign. Every major news organization in the world had that image in their archives. The second discovery stopped the audit cold. Missing was the double-strand pearl necklace Queen Elizabeth had worn at Princess Diana's funeral in 1997, one of the most widely reproduced images in the entire modern era of the British monarchy. That image showed a queen dressed in black, in public mourning, at the service of a woman whose death had pushed the royal family closer to losing public trust than anything else in recent memory. The monetary value of that piece was extraordinary, and what it represented in the monarchy's history was something no price could cover. Both items were serious, but the third discovery was the one that changed the nature of the inquiry entirely. Also absent from the vault were 2 worn leather-bound journals, handwritten personal reflections by Queen Elizabeth, composed during the long and isolated months of the global lockdown, and legally sealed under the strict statutes of the Royal Collection Trust until the year 2122. No member of the royal family, palace official, or court authority held any legal right to access them before that date. The Queen had sealed them deliberately, addressed to a generation not yet alive, people who would read her words with no personal memory of the events she described. Walton escalated through official channels without delay. Within hours, the matter had moved far above the level of a quarterly Treasury report, and by the time King Charles received the full briefing, the language inside the palace had already changed. The palace had stopped using the word missing. The word now was stolen. Charles ordered a quiet internal investigation before the day was over, and within 24 hours, the security logs had delivered a result no one inside that building had been prepared for. A palace guard had entered the restricted treasury wing before dawn on a night he had no scheduled reason to be anywhere near it. So, who had sent him there, and how had that person known exactly how to access a vault with the highest level of royal clearance? How they caught her? King Charles appointed Sir Clement Meister, a senior intelligence figure with a long record of trusted service to the royal household, to lead the internal investigation before the day was out. The instructions were precise. Establish exactly what happened, how it was done, and who was responsible, and keep everything inside palace walls until the complete picture had been assembled. The security logs delivered the first significant finding. Records showed that palace guard Robert Halton had entered the restricted treasury wing of Buckingham Palace at 3:49 in the morning on April 27th, nearly 2 hours before his scheduled shift began at 5:45. He had moved through restricted corridors before dawn and accessed a secured area with vault clearance that carried no legitimate justification at that hour, no maintenance log, no supervisor authorization, and no documented reason of any kind for being in that section of the building. Investigators brought Halton in for questioning, and he held to a flat denial through the early stages of the examination. Under continued and methodical questioning, his account came apart. He eventually admitted he had entered the vault after receiving a call through an internal palace telephone line from someone who had known specific and detailed personal information about his life, his family's financial situation, the nature of his wife's medical treatment, and the debts connected to her ongoing care. The caller had implied senior authority within the royal household and told him that what was being requested had been authorized at the highest level. Halton maintained throughout that he believed he was following legitimate orders and had not personally removed anything from the vault. Halton was suspended from his post before the interrogation concluded and escorted from the building the same morning. His access credentials were revoked immediately. As part of the same review, investigators examined how a call originating from a private residential wing had been able to reach an on-duty guard without triggering any monitoring flag. What they found was that the telephone lines running through the private residential sections of the palace operated under a separate and older internal system, one that had never been brought under the same oversight protocols applied to the rest of the building. That gap had made the call possible, and it had made the call untraceable until someone knew exactly where to look. Whether every element of that account held up was something the investigation continued to examine. But the critical detail had nothing to do with Halton's version of events. It was about the call itself. When Sir Clement's team traced the origin of that internal phone call, the result was unambiguous. The signal had not come from outside the palace and had not been placed by any unidentifiable device. It traced directly back to the private residential wing of Buckingham Palace, the section of the building occupied by Queen Camilla. That was the first piece of evidence pointing directly to her, but it was not the last. The second came through a door nobody had been watching. Eleanor Hartridge was a palace staff member who had worked inside the Queen Consort's residential wing long enough to know every room by habit. While carrying out a routine tidying of a bedroom in that wing, she noticed a rabbit-shaped jewelry box sitting slightly out of alignment beneath a wardrobe. When she picked it up, the weight was far heavier than an empty decorative box had any reason to be. A faint seam along the base caught her attention. She pressed carefully along the lining. The base lifted, and a hidden compartment opened. Inside it, carefully wrapped, was the sapphire Jubilee brooch. The investigation now had a traced phone call, documented vault access logs, and a stolen item recovered from a concealed space, all pointing to the same residential wing and the same occupant. Sir Clement delivered the complete picture to Charles before the end of the day. Charles reviewed every detail and sent one message asking Camilla to come to his private study. But when she arrived and heard the question he put to her, the explanation she gave raised something even Charles had not anticipated. Could any part of what she was about to claim actually be verified? "Charles, put it all on the desk." The sapphire Jubilee brooch sat on the desk between them under a single lamp, in a room with no staff present, no advisors on either side, and no formal structure of any kind around what was about to happen. Those in the adjoining area later said Camilla's eyes went straight to the brooch the moment she stepped through the door. A brief recognition crossed her face before she composed herself, the look of someone who already knew exactly why she had been called there. Charles asked one question: how a piece from the royal collection ended up concealed in her residential wing. He already held every answer before she arrived. The phone call had been traced to her section of the building. The vault access logs from April 27th were fully documented. Eleanor Hartridge had found the brooch inside a hidden compartment and reported it immediately through official channels. Sir Clement's team had assembled the complete picture before the study door opened. The question was not about filling gaps. It was about what Camilla was going to say, and what direction the afternoon would take because of it. She pushed back against any suggestion of theft. According to her account, the sapphire Jubilee brooch had been promised to her in a private conversation with Queen Elizabeth years before the Queen's death, a personal inheritance understanding, quietly given between two women, never formalized, never put in writing, and not verifiable by any witness still alive. In her telling, she had not stolen the piece. She had collected something already given to her through a promise no one could now confirm or contradict. That explanation covered one item, but it said nothing about the journals. As for the journals, Camilla did not deny she had taken them, but the reason she offered had nothing to do with personal possession. She told Charles she had become aware that Queen Elizabeth had written private doubts and personal reflections during the lockdown months, and that those words, read decades from now by people with no knowledge of the circumstances under which they were produced, could cause serious and lasting damage to his reign long after anyone alive today was present to provide context. She said she had not acted out of self-interest, but was trying to protect him. Charles listened to everything without visible reaction and said very little in return. Then he told her to come back that afternoon. The decision would not be made in a quiet study with a single lamp. It would be made in a room with 5 people at a table, and by the time Camilla arrived, the 2 men who controlled the outcome had already spent the morning deciding exactly what it was going to be. Would the presence of William beside his father determine how far Charles was actually willing to go? The war room. Later that afternoon, the heavy oak doors of the palace war room closed behind 5 people. King Charles sat at the head of the table. Prince William sat directly beside him. Princess Anne and Prince Edward were also present, and Camilla sat across from the 2 men who had spent that morning in private conversation. Everyone in that room understood what they were there for before Charles said a word. He presented the evidence with calm, systematic precision. The missing items, the vault access log showing Halton's unexplained entry before dawn on April 27th, the internal phone call traced directly to Camilla's residential wing, and the hidden compartment inside the jewelry box that Eleanor Hartridge had found during a routine tidying. He delivered each detail without theatrics and without visible anger, working through the record with the measured composure of a man who had spent days absorbing every element and now carried the full weight of what his position required him to do with it. Camilla repeated the explanations she had given in the private study, the verbal promise from Queen Elizabeth regarding the brooch, and the concern that the journals, read decades from now without context, could cause lasting damage to Charles's reputation long after anyone alive today was present to explain what the Queen had actually meant. Prince William said nothing throughout. He sat completely still, and everyone present understood what that stillness carried. A man who had spent his adult life working to rebuild an institution shaped by the personal decisions of the generation before him, who had seen up close what happens when private choices collide with public duty, and who had come to that table with his position already fully settled. His silence said everything. When Camilla finished, Princess Anne's expression remained hard, and the room held quiet for a long moment before Charles stood. He told the room that the legal framework governing the late Queen's personal belongings allowed for no individual exceptions. Nothing from Queen Elizabeth's collection was to be moved, opened, or removed for nearly a century. Verbal assurances, however genuinely intended, carried no legal weight against established statute, and no individual within the royal household, regardless of title or stated motivation, held the authority to decide which parts of a monarch's legacy should be hidden from the future. All ceremonial duties were stripped, military titles removed, and public engagements suspended indefinitely. She had no future claim over any item from the late Queen's personal collection, and no rights were extended to any member of her family over those historic pieces under any circumstances whatsoever. One final line closed it. The monarchy survives through service and trust, and when that trust breaks inside its own walls, it places the strength of the crown at risk. No one in the room argued. Charles and William had made their decision, and Camilla had no part in what came next. But the ruling had been delivered inside 4 walls, with no cameras present. How was the palace going to move a sitting queen consort out of Buckingham Palace before London woke up and the press started asking where she was? She was gone before London woke up. The morning of Monday, May 15th, arrived over London under a heavy grey sky. Outside the gates of Buckingham Palace, the usual crowd had already begun to gather. Tourists with cameras, visitors with guidebooks, people passing through on their way somewhere else. None of them knew that inside those walls, the position of Queen Consort had already ceased to exist. In the early hours of that morning, Camilla had already left the building. She was moved to Ray Mill House, her private residence in Wiltshire, with deliberate and careful discretion. No announcement came from the palace gates, no ceremony marked the departure, and no formal statement was issued to the press. But the administrative changes that followed in the hours afterward were immediate and visible to anyone watching the right channels. Her name was removed from the royal circular, the official document listing members of the royal family and their scheduled public engagements. Upcoming appearances were quietly pulled from internal calendars without explanation. Within 72 hours, charities connected to her patronages had received formal letters informing them that their royal associations were under review, with several partnerships placed on immediate suspension. The evening before her departure, at exactly 9 o'clock, King Charles addressed the nation in a pre-recorded broadcast from his private study. He confirmed that items belonging to the late Queen Elizabeth had been fully recovered, and that a member of his household had faced consequences under the royal code governing the protection of the collection. He did not say Camilla's name once. Within minutes of the broadcast ending, news networks broke from regular programming. Some commentators called it necessary and overdue accountability. Others described it as a personal collapse playing out under global scrutiny. What made the public reaction hit as hard as it did was the context. After decades of deep skepticism, the British public had only recently begun to accept Camilla as queen consort. The coronation had shifted things. The years of patient, visible public work had slowly moved the conversation. Then, overnight, the title was gone, and the position was empty. Kate continued to appear in pieces from the royal collection at major state occasions, and the collection moved forward without any pause. Everything Camilla had built across 20 years had been removed in a single afternoon. The titles were gone, the jewelry was gone, and the position she had spent most of her adult life reaching was gone. What exactly did the investigation find when they examined those journals? And what did it tell Charles about how far this had actually gone? What the investigation actually found? When the vault was sealed again under new digital access codes known only to Charles and William, the internal investigation had not produced a clean answer on the most important questions still open. Sir Clement Meister's team had examined the physical condition of both journals as part of the evidence review, specifically looking for signs that the pages had been opened and read before the items were concealed in the hidden compartment. What they found was recorded in the internal report and kept inside palace walls. Insiders close to the process described the findings as inconclusive. The journals showed signs of handling consistent with being moved and deliberately hidden, but whether any pages had actually been opened could not be established from the physical evidence alone. That gap was not lost on anyone inside the palace. Camilla had not addressed the reading question directly during either the private study meeting or the war room session, and the official record of both conversations reflected exactly that. The investigation had established who had taken the journals, how the vault had been accessed, and how the items had been concealed after removal. It had not established whether anything had actually been read, and Charles had closed both conversations without pressing for a clear answer on that specific point. The final report compiled by Sir Clement was delivered to Charles and filed within palace records. Its contents were not shared with the press, the investigation was recorded as complete, the recovered items were returned to the vault, and the new access protocols Charles put in place after the inquiry closed required dual authorization from both him and William for any future entry to that section of the collection. With those protocols in place, the vault was more secure than it had been at any point before the events of that spring. The two leather-bound journals sat behind reinforced steel under new codes, back in the position the law had always required them to hold. They were addressed to a generation not yet born, sealed until 2122, and accessible to no one currently alive. What Queen Elizabeth had written during those long, isolated lockdown months remained completely unknown to everyone who had been involved in the events of that spring. Camilla's explanation to Charles had stated clearly that she feared the content could damage his reign. Whether that fear came from something she had actually read or something she had only suspected was there, was the one question the report had recorded as unresolved. Charles had received that finding, reviewed it, and delivered his ruling anyway, without forcing the reading question into the open and without making it part of the official public record. And the people who had been closest to those events inside the palace were left carrying the one detail the official record would never confirm. Whether the woman who had orchestrated a midnight vault operation to reach those journals had ever actually read a single word of what was written inside them, or had burned her entire position in the royal family over something she had only imagined was there. Did King Charles make a deliberate choice to leave the reading question out of the public record? And if so, was that decision made to protect the institution or to protect something far more personal than that? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.